Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Michaela Dominico, and I'll be presenting Something's Rotten, a virtual workshop about mold, water damage, and unresponsive landlords. I'd like to thank Ottawa ACORN and Emily from Ottawa ACORN for helping make this event possible tonight. Before we begin today, I want to recognize this meeting is taking place on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. We are grateful to be here and hold this meeting here. On our agenda this evening, we're going to be going over mold, the basics, how to deal with mold as a tenant, and what we can do to organize collective action to help fight this common problem. It should take about 2 hours this evening. We estimated that because we're going to be including question and answer sections after every chapter of tonight's meeting. I would also like to give a shout out to Mr. George P. White, one of Canada's leading professional mycologists. Mr. White is also known as the mold manager, as he has worked in many different areas with school boards, governments, First Nations, engineering firms, lawyers, real estate agents, insurance companies, nursery schools, property managers, landlords, tenants, and homeowners. Anyone who has had a mold issue or a concern about mold, there's a good chance he's been able to work with them. Mr. White was very kind and agreed to do an interview with me. And tonight in our virtual workshop, we will be going over the answers of the questions I asked him. The goals of the virtual workshop this evening include symptoms of mold exposure, because there's a large varieties of symptoms that can impact people. We'll be also be going over how you can recognize the signs of mold, what the signs of water damage are, so you can be able to act quickly. You'll be learning about how to control mold, how to prevent mold, how to protect yourself and your family from mold if it comes that you have to clean it, as mold is very common. We will also be going, what are your rights and your responsibilities as a tenant? And what are your landlord's responsibilities and rights? And if necessary, will be what you need to do to take legal action, as this is a very common problem where landlords aren't exactly on the ball about addressing mold issues or generally other maintenance issues in their units. And this comes at the harm of tenants. So, and then finally, we'll be going over what can we do as a collective to fight for change? Because currently the laws around this subject are not very just. They allow landlords to very easily get away with hiding mold. And problem with hiding mold is the mold can still affect people's health. So we want to find ways as a community what we can do to help bring change to this. Next, please. Thank you all the new people who have just came in. We will be recording this session as well. So if you missed a little bit of the start, I'll share a link that you'll be able to watch this virtual workshop again. Thank you. So before we begin, we're going to go over some housekeeping rules. So we're going to be making sure that everyone's microphones are muted to make sure there's no background noise. We will also there's a little chat box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions or you would like to be unmuted to ask a question, we can unmute you by requesting it there. We're also going to make sure in this meeting, everything is confidential. Anything you share will not be taken outside of this meeting. So know this is a safe place to share. We also want to make sure that we're not making any assumptions about other people. You want to also know that, expressing your emotions is okay. And this is a safe place to do that here, especially because, it can be very frustrating to have to go through such a situation where your landlord's not dealing with mold. Anyway, so you also want to remember that there's multiple truths out there and they can exist in the same space. So something that is not true to you can be true to someone else. So please respect that. We're going to stay on topic. We want to keep the topics relevant. We also remember to critique ideas and not people. Feel free again to ask any questions. And if you notice that you're the only one speaking, you can take on the role of a listener, and you want to maybe support other people who have not had a chance to be really heard and they may want to speak. And finally, you want to also challenge oppressive language. So we're never, again, making assumptions or using discriminatory language against other people. You don't know what their background is, what they go through, and this is a non-judgmental, respectful environment. Thank you. Welcome again to another new person who has joined. This workshop will be recorded, so if you missed anything at the start, you will be able to watch it again later. So what is ACORN? For those of you who haven't heard of ACORN before, ACORN is a membership-driven advocacy organization. It advocates for low and moderate income families and is funded by dues from its members. And in doing this, it remains independent from government and other institutions, with all chapters around the country and the world. It's amazing. We are, as ACORN, we are member driven in that we receive funding from our members so that we can continue to serve and are independent of corporations and government bodies. And by doing this, we can serve to hold those powers accountable that way. And we don't just fight, we do win and make a lot of changes happen. For example, in August, we won 2 new bylaws, one on pest control and the other on how landlords manage their properties so they're kept in a good state of repair, because very commonly they can just really let them go. If you'd like to join ACORN and to support grassroots activities such as this one, you can join for $15 a month to become a full member, and you can help fight for social and economic justice. Next, Emily, thank you. So first section, we're going to go over mold, the basics. So why does mold matter? Most of us have encountered mold before. Mold's everywhere, indoor, outdoor. It's a very natural part of life. So, but why is it that big of a deal then? Why does it matter? Well, because we spend so much time indoors, our indoor air quality really matters, as our indoor air quality directly impacts our health. And because mold impacts indoor air quality, mold therefore can impact your health. So part of how it does that is because mold will release spores when there's an active growth, and certain species of mold can release what's called mycotoxins. Not all species of mold will release mycotoxins, but just by looking at mold, you can identify what species it is, and therefore you cannot know if it actually releases mycotoxins. And another thing about the mycotoxins is that they're basically a gas. So even if there's mold hiding behind a wall somewhere that's out of sight that you might not know about, it can still continue to impact your health because the mycotoxins are like gases. Therefore, they can go through building material, whether that be ceilings, walls, flooring, etc. And due to this, they can continue to cause a wide variety of negative health impacts to humans and pets. Next, please, Emily. So what are some symptoms of mold exposure? Surprisingly, there's a lot of different symptoms that can be caused by mold. Some of these symptoms can range from basic like allergy-like symptoms, such as eyes, eye, nose, and throat irritation. You feel fatigued frequently. You can have constant headaches. You have difficulty concentrating. People who are immunocompromised can end up developing pretty serious lung infections, such as what's it called, aspergillus. So what that causes is like fungal masses in someone's lung, and usually our immune system, we breathe in thousands of mold spores every day, right? Our immune system is usually able to clear these mold spores without having too much of an issue. The issue comes when either you're immunocompromised or when you have such a large amount of mold, it's not good even if you're not immune, if you're immunocompetent, basically. So some of these other symptoms of breathing in spores and mycotoxins can cause like coughing, mucus and phlegm buildup. That's usually generally because our body is trying to encapsulate these spores, like these toxins, right, to help filter them. But if there's too much of them in our environment, it can cause these buildup of mucus and irritations to your eyes, your skin, your throat. Can also lead in your lungs. It can also lead to wheezing, chest tightness, shortness of breath. If you have asthma, it can lead to a worsening of asthma symptoms. And it can also cause other allergy-like symptoms, including muscle and joint pain. itchy and dry eyes, and our skin. The reason why it can cause like such thing as a muscle and joint pain, you might wonder why is that, is because when we inhale mold spores and the mycotoxins, as I said before, our immune system usually can regulate this and it can deal with this, right? But over time, your immune system is weak, like can be weakened by this, because this is quite a load for your immune system to constantly be working through and dealing with. And never mind, there's also other pollutants in our environment, such as smoke, VOC, such as like paint, other sources of pollution, right? So all this has a cumulative effect. And when our immune system is overwhelmed like that, and can lead to widespread inflammation, which can cause a lot of these different symptoms, including the muscle and body pain. Thank you. Next. Next slide, please, Emily. Thank you. So what are some of the ways that you can be exposed to mold? So the basic routes of exposure are through inhalation. So, breathing it in your environment. You can also ingest it by eating it or drinking it. As most people know, if you've left a sandwich or something too long, it can get pretty nasty. So if we don't notice that or something, or when we go to eat a piece of food, you can end up ingesting mold from that route. You can also end up having it exposed through your skin. Usually we absorb about 80% of what our skin touches. So those are the three main routes, especially if sometimes, since mold can look like dirt, if you unexpectedly go to clean up what you think is dirt and it's mold, that is a way that it can be exposed to it. Next, please. So is it really that big of a deal? Because some people seem to get really sick from mold, and some people seem to not have any symptoms at all. That is why it's really hard for them to the health institutions to really make like a set, this amount of mold equals this sickness, because there's a lot of factors that influence why someone will get sick potentially from mold where others won't. Some of these factors include your sex, your age, if you have any other underlying health conditions, sorry, as well as anything else in like your lifestyle that can influence it. So there's a lot of variables, along with the variables of what species of mold is in your environment, the amount of it. And so that's why not everyone gets symptoms, but some people do. So because of this, just because you don't have symptoms does not mean that there is not mold growth present. I learned this from personal experience, as I lived in a very moldy past rental. And now whenever I am exposed to mold, again, a large amount, specifically certain kinds, I get very noticeable symptoms. That I get like stomach aches, I get muscle pain, I get really bad headaches, I get chest tightness. And it's generally a sign that there's potentially mold nearby. And because mold is everywhere, it's a little difficult. But specifically, it's different when it's from a source of water damage or like a big amount, right? So because mold can impact our health, can it even impact your health if you can't see it? If you don't see like, a big piece of mold or a spot somewhere, can it still impact your health? For example, is it behind a wall, in an attic, under flooring, in a washing machine, in an AC or HVAC system? So I asked this question to the mycologist, George White, and he responded, "It's very rare that mold that impacts health is obvious and visible, but the subtle clues that it is present are usually evident, including a history of water damage, musty odors, and certain select spiders and insects." The reason why he said certain select spiders or insects is because certain spiders and insects will only inhabit places that have a high moisture content or a high relative humidity in the area. So things like that can include silverfish, certain types of centipedes, also what's called long-bodied cellar spiders, which are spiders that look very, very similar to what you would see probably as daddy long legs. And so all these certain insects and spiders can reflect the fact that there's a moisture problem, because they need a very high amount of moisture for them to inhabit an area. Thank you, please. I'm sorry, next, please. So where does mold come from? So the thing about mold is mold's always been around. Mold has been around as long as humans have, or even like longer before than that. So mold spores are everywhere. They are indoors, outdoors, a lot of different sources. Mold is the recycler of life. Hello to the new person who just joined. We will have
Don't worry about it.
Okay,
Just
sorry.
keep going.
Okay. So mold is everywhere. And its natural job is to recycle plant matter, especially specifically dead plant matter or organic matter of any sorts. And since it's everywhere, it can only really grow though when it has a food source and a source of water. Some of these food sources can vary. They can be organic or
Sorry.
It's okay. They can be inorganic or organic matter. Oops, it's going the wrong way.
Sorry.
No, it's
Where?
okay.
How do I get back? Oh no, I'm sorry.
Having some technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties. Don't look. Here, is this the right one?
Wait, nope. I believe it was keep going. Nope, keep going up. I think it was slide 10, I believe. Oh wait, no, that one. Thank you, 11.
Sorry about that.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone.
Ta-da.
So since mold is everywhere, as we talked about, the spores specifically are everywhere. Mold is waiting till it has a chance to have what it needs, right? It's food source and a moisture source, whether that be a water leak, high humidity, condensation. These are all things that can be sources for mold to grow and cause growth. Another reason why mold is very common is because it's extremely versatile. Certain molds can grow in lowest temperatures as 5 degrees, and some molds specifically will need at least between 25 and 30 Celsius. But they will also, certain species of mold will survive when it's 80 to 100 Fahrenheit, and some species can survive as low as minus 30. They're quite versatile, and they can last a long time. So they need to, for mold to grow, it needs to have the water source for at least 24 to 48 hours, or sometimes even 3 days. That is why it's so important to have any sources of water or leaks or anything properly dried and dealt with between that time frame, because anything longer, that's all it needs to the time. Sorry, that's all the time it needs to grow. So it's quite quickly. And also, even when mold doesn't have an active mold growth, doesn't have its source of moisture anymore, say it was a pipe leak, the pipe leak was fixed, but they didn't replace the drywall in the area. If there was mold growing on that drywall, it's waiting, basically, it can become dormant until there's another source of moisture again. So it's not that the mold really dies at all, it just basically goes to sleep. So that's why some landlords have dealt with situations where they wouldn't replace the drywall, and when eventually, if there was another leak or another source of moisture, such as high humidity, we're in Ottawa, we get really muggy, hot, humid weather. That is a perfect source for mold growth because the amount of high humidity we get. So mold can become active again because of that. Please, next slide. Thank you, Emily. So what are some of the types of mold species? So there's 3 main types. There's allergenic species, pathogenic, and toxigenic. So allergenic species are the type of mold that's like usually the least harmful of all mold types. But the problem is it can still cause problems for people who are allergic to mold or have asthma, or if an allergenic species is in a very, very large amount, because generally any amount of mold should not be accepted in our environments because it can pose a health hazard, no matter the species type. But thankfully, compared to some of the more, the other ones, pathogenic and toxigenic species, it's not usually as life-threatening. Next, we have the pathogenic species. So this type is often more harmful. not only for people with asthma or mold allergies, but for healthy people too. For example, this type of mold can cause hypersensitivity pneumonitis, which is basically causes a lot of inflammation in your lungs. It can cause scarring as well. It usually will be accompanied by flu-like symptoms such as fever, chills, body aches, and this can last for anywhere from 5 to 7 days onward, depending if you're exposed again to that environment that triggered it, that had the mold. It can also create an acute response resembling bacterial pneumonia. There's been a lot of times that sometimes people would think that they had a normal like a pneumonia, but it's being triggered by the mold in their environment, but their doctor might have not thought to bring that up or question that, because the patient might have not questioned that's causing it, or could have been. And finally, we have the most harmful of them all, which is toxigenic species. So these molds can create serious health effects, both temporary eye irritation or cough, and also permanent damage, so they can cause immune suppression, neurological disorders, or even cancer because of what they do to the body. And toxigenic mold spores are usually the ones who produce myotoxins, which are what we talked about earlier, being the toxic chemical that present inside or on the mold spore, which can be inhaled, ingested, or touched. Thank you, Emily. Next one. So how do we know, is one source of mold more likely to have one of these allergenic species of mold versus toxigenic species? So I asked this question to George. I said, are there species of mold that grow from a roof leak, a pipe leak, or a flood likely to pose a health risk more than mold that's growing in a bathroom from condensation? So mold in bathrooms is very, very common, as most people might have experienced, because of the environment, right? There's not usually sometimes a lot of airflow, there's a lot of humidity because of a shower. So it's very common to find mold in a bathroom. So could that mold be less harmful than, say, ones from a flood or a leak or something? And this is when George replied. He said, molds can't always be separated by where they grow. How much water is available is a more important criteria. So that generally, right? So if something like a flood or a leak that's constant, right, can provide more water to a species, but that doesn't always completely mean that certain other species won't grow. So that's where George highlighted fungi seldom grow alone. So most species of mold, if you have one species of mold, there's likely other species of mold, because they compete for the environment that they're in. So even if you only had a certain species, say like Cladosporium is one of the most common types of household molds, and it's usually only an allergenic species. Even if you just have that mold, doesn't mean that it's just that mold. Potentially there is very likely going to be other molds in your house, and some of these molds could potentially be the more harmful ones. And as George said, there are no good or safe fungi, although the risk of exposure from some species, as I mentioned, Cladosporium, are lower most of the time than those like the toxigenic or toxic species, which is called Stachybotrys. When most people think about toxic black mold, usually Stachybotrys is the one that is being talked about, because that is one of the most well-known toxic molds. There is other molds that are toxigenic that aren't always as talked about, but doesn't mean they're any less toxic. And then, as George said here, there's a real danger in oversimplifying mold. Bringing this up because a lot of time when you have landlords who are not addressing a problem, they just say, oh, it's just a little mold, or they say it's mildew. Like, they don't take it so seriously, because maybe it's not from a roof leak or something, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed. And that's why, again, George recognized that there is a real danger in oversimplifying mold. Next slide, please. So what are some of the signs of water damage? So if you know the signs, you can at least know what to look out for, because sometimes, as George also said, right, you're not always the mold that impacts your health isn't always visible. So being able to know some of the signs, you'll be able to be more equipped, right? So what things you want to look out for are discolored areas on ceilings, walls, or floors. These can look at like different patterns of spotting. You can also check if you notice on your walls, if they feel wet or damp, that can be a sign that there's a water leak or something in that area. If they feel soft to the touch or spongy, that's also very alarming because that means that the wall is losing its integrity. If you ever seen rotten wood break, it kind of falls apart if it's really water damaged. The same kind of thing will happen with other building material, but you might not always notice it because a lot of the time these water leaks and stuff can go hidden for a long time. Another thing you want to look out for is warped flooring. As seen as an example in the bottom picture here. This was taken at our previous house that had the really bad water damage to it. And I never knew that the flooring there that was warped was anything of a cause of concern because I thought our landlord, had seen it before and I didn't see any mold on top, so it must not be an issue. But if you look, you can see that the wood is very like melted looking. So that shows that there's very likely some wood rot going on under there. And even if I couldn't see mold on top, there's very likely that there potentially is mold underneath because there clearly was water damage there, which warped the wood. And when the wood wasn't replaced over time, that had let any mold that was there continue to grow. Another thing you can look out for is peeling or bubbling walls or ceiling. This, when you notice paint on walls bubbling, it can be from high humidity. There's other reasons why paint on walls can bubble and create these effects. But if you notice it's bubbling and if you touch it and water is coming out of it, that's a good sign that should be addressed because it shows that the wall is retaining moisture and there could potentially be an issue there. It's called also, so you want to make sure that another sign could be if you smell anything that smells earthy or musty, damp, or like wet socks. Mold can have multiple different signs beside these odors. Some people have even said that mold has smelled like cat urine ammonia even if they didn't have any cats in the building. The thing about mold is there's a lot of different species and we don't know 100% about all the different species of mold out there that can live around us. But generally smellings of earthiness, mustiness, damp, or like wet socks are general mold smells. And then finally, another sign of water damage is high humidity. If you notice certain rooms or areas in your house always feel really, really humid, and even when you have fans or other things going to try to get rid of or to get rid of the humidity, if it keeps getting high, there's very likely that could be a sign that there's water damage hiding somewhere. So I just wanted to mention also, I'm going to take the time to answer all the questions at the little question, at this end of the section here. And I just want to make sure you knew that, so I'm not ignoring your questions. I will answer them at the next couple of slides after this. Thank you. So what are some of the signs of mold? So it can have like a spotted pattern, as you can see on the left-hand bottom corner. This was a surface in our house that we would clean, and it very quickly developed mold within probably 3 days or so. And this happened specifically, if you see the picture on the right-hand side, this is inside of our previous houses, only a form of air circulation, the ductless AC unit. This had not been cleaned in at least 3 years or so. You can't open into this unless you're an HVAC technician. So it was not our responsibility as tenants to clean either. We didn't even have any signs that anything was wrong with it until it started having a water leak. And then I realized the smell that I had been smelling for a little while was like wet socks. I didn't really put the pieces together prior to that and until it started breaking down. So I took that photo when the HVAC company came, and they diagnosed it as a lot of mold in there, which explains some of why I got sick. Anyways, so mold because there's a lot of different species of mold, it can vary in colors from green to black to yellow to brown to gray to blue, white, or even orange. Even some species of mold that are in the same family, such as Cladosporium, which is predominantly the main one that was found in the AC unit picture here. That can, when people see black mold, they might think, that's automatically Stachybotrys, right? The really toxic kind. That's not always usually the case, right? Different molds can look similar, and the only really way you can know is by having it professionally tested. No landlord or property management can look at a mold and say like, oh, that's the not harmful kind, or they can identify it by that. They are not a professional, and if they tell you so, that they're lying. Yeah. So appearance can also vary. So it can be fuzzy looking. It can also have like a suede look to it. It can also be slime-like. Specifically, the really toxic kind, usually Stachybotrys, is kind of referred to as slime mold because its consistency looks like slime. But take in mind that this can vary a lot. And mold can frequently look like dirt because of its patterning being spotty and it being various colors. Next slide, please. So what are some indicators of moisture problems? Since we can't always see mold growing on a wall somewhere, if we can identify what are some signs of moisture issues in our rentals or in our homes, we can have a better idea of what's potentially going on and to contact our landlords and have this addressed. So a sign could be condensation on windows or other building material. So this happens really frequently sometimes with older windows, specifically like at our previous rental, we always had a lot of water coming, condensation buildup on our windows. This house didn't have a forced air system, like air ventilation that way. It had only electric baseboards, right? So that didn't help with it. Anyways, so you want to look at condensation buildup, like a lot of it on windows. That can be a sign of a moisture problem. General high humidity, like I said before, if you notice a certain room or area in the house that feels extremely humid, even after you keep trying to air out the area and it just seems to be really humid around there, that could be a sign of moisture problems. You also want to look out again for damp odors and or walls. So if you notice on a wall that it's quite wet feeling in comparison to other areas in the house, that could potentially be a sign. There is other causes of that, right? Depending if you have your stove nearby or something, like sources of moisture can cause that. But if you notice a certain wall or something specifically is having a lot of condensation buildup on it, or is generally damp or wet, definitely have that addressed. Another, as I mentioned earlier, silverfish and long-bodied cellar spiders. They are very common indicators of moisture problems. Specifically, especially with silverfish, they do eat mold. We had a really bad silverfish problem at our previous rental. It was up on our top floor where the bathroom was. And most of us have seen silverfish throughout your life. They're pretty common, right? Especially in sometimes older homes, and didn't think much of it, but the amount of silverfish there should have been a cause of alarm. Below, I have a little picture here of what is a cellar spider, long-bodied cellar spider, versus what's called a harvest man, or what has been called a daddy longlegs. Daddy longlegs and long-bodied cellar spiders look very, very similar. The only difference is that the long-bodied cellar spider will have what looks like a kind of like an appendage attached to it, because cellar spiders or spiders in general always have this kind of appendage, where the harvest man is actually an arachnid, where they don't have that. So daddy longlegs actually isn't a spider, it's an arachnid. So using this, I didn't want to put a real picture of a cellar spider in case anyone's squeamish towards spiders. So I just wanted to get a visual aid of what these long-bodied cellar spiders look like, because they do look very similar to daddy longlegs. Thank you. Next slide. So we're going to continue on with some interview questions with George. And then after this part, we'll be going through and answering any questions. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to import them into the chat. So for first interview question, again with George, I asked if there are signs of water damage, such as discolored ceiling spots or warped wood flooring. Does that mean that there could be mold there? George replied, those are signs typically. Those signs are typically things that should be investigated. So when there is water damage, it doesn't always mean that there is going to be mold growth, but if the water damage was not addressed within 24 to 48 hours, or at least 3 days, there's a very likely chance that mold can grow because it is such a common thing. Next question was I asked, can water damage building materials such as drywall dry out on its own without removing it? And George replied, the simple answer is yes, but it has to reach dryness in 3 days. Room surfaces may dry out, but the wall behind a baseboard will hold water much longer, and wall cavities can remain wet for a very long time. So even if you were to touch the wall and it feels dry on the outside, as I said, on the back of the drywall, it can hold it for a long period of time. And you would not notice that if there's mold growing on the back because it's on the backside where it's not visible to the outside, right? And also, George mentioned, that the underside of furniture is also an area that is slow to dry and will often grow mold. So if furniture that's up against a wall, if there's condensation and a lack of airflow, that can cause an environment where mold can grow because it struggles to dry out, especially if it's right up against a wall, especially an exterior wall where there might be a change in temperature. And the next question was, if the water damage happened a while ago, how do I ensure my landlord properly addressed it? And so he said the answer is that usually needs some testing by someone who knows what they are doing. And often it does require what they call destructive testing. So what destructive testing is if you damage a wall or floor, you take out a piece of it and they would bring it to a lab and look under a microscope to see if there's any fungal growth to be able to identify it. Someone as a mycologist would be able to do. But the problem with most tenants, right, is you're not allowed to do such destructive testing because that would be causing damages to the unit, right? But as George said, if you do damage a wall or floor and you do find mold, you will likely be forgiven. George has also worked with many tenants and landlords, schools, also First Nations. He has a lot of different experience with a lot of different areas, and he's been through court cases with landlord tenant board disputes. So that's good to know. Thank you. Next, are we on to questions? On to questions. Oh, sorry, a couple more questions here, and then we'll address any personally asked questions. So I asked, my landlord told me it is not mold growth on the ceiling, it's just mildew. Is there a difference, or did they just tell me that so they feel that they do not have to address the mildew damage? George responded, the idea that mold and mildew in this context are somehow different is absolute nonsense. The distinction between mold and mildew is a deceptive fabrication to avoid rectifying the problem. If mold is visible, landlords should be addressing it. While the exposure risks vary from species to species of mold and individual to individual, there are no molds that should be allowed to grow and remain indoors. Indoor mold growth can be a very serious issue that needs to be addressed. I haven't met a landlord who can accurately identify mold at the site and make that determination. Even after 40 years of experience, I can make a good guess, but even that is still a guess until it is analyzed microscopically. Thank you. And knowing this, we will now go and answer some questions. Oh, sorry. Actually, I have one more thing. So we're going to take a little break here for a second. We're going to go through some questions through the chat here. So first, if you would like to speak, just mention on the chat and we can unmute you, or otherwise I can just read your question that you asked. So,
Yeah, Rochelle was sharing some knowledge a little bit.
Yeah, okay. So
And Jennifer Larson asked a question.
okay.
She asked if mold can smell like olives.
I personally haven't heard about that, but I can ask George, the mycologist, if he's ever experienced that in his experience, because we do know is mold can vary from species to species, and there's a lot about mold we don't fully understand, but I can get back to you on that. I don't want to make any assumptions of information I don't have clear clarification of, but that's a really good one because they can vary a lot in different smells. So it could potentially, but I can find out to see if that is true.
Yep. And Rochelle was sharing some of her personal experience, which I won't read out loud now, but later we were going to have a bit more time to share the personal experiences and see if we learn anything in the next section on tenants' rights about how to move forward with that. But if you'd like to speak, Rochelle, or have any questions, and then you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Rochelle, for opening up and sharing.
Yeah. And Danny came on with some really good knowledge too about Paracel Labs, where he was able to bring in some samples, but still quite expensive, $150, which
that's
when it comes to your health, like, of course it's not, nothing to is more important, but it's still expensive, and something that, in the ideal situation, we want something that to be something the tenants, the landlords
that pay for. But unfortunately, the problem is very frequently what I was told when we were suing our landlord was that if your landlord does pay for the testing, they are not legally obligated to share the result with you. If it is like a super toxic kind that they're being told that they have to evacuate you from the building, then they will. But there's a lot of ways that they can very easily like work around it. And if you're taking your landlord to court to a certain extent, you might not have access to those results, which is pretty horrible because you should know how something is impacting your health, and it shouldn't be based on them trying to hide that because they're trying to get out of legal repercussions. But thank you, Danny, also for sharing the Parcel Labs. I will check them out. I don't know if they are still available, but hopefully they are. There are a few different services, agencies such as Parcel Labs, or what's it called? The Residential and Industrial Fungal Detection Services, which is run by Mr. George White, who can also do these type of testings. There is also there's also one called Mold Busters. I'm not 100% sure about them. I've heard mixed reviews, but there's a lot of different services. Definitely want to do your background checks on some of them, because personally, the analyzing mold samples can be quite complex, and the interpretation of the data can get a little confusing for the company that's doing it, because they're not usually the ones actually doing they're having a third party look at the lab results, right? So then they have to interpret that data. Where specifically Mr. George White, he's also a mycologist who also does the testing, so he can give you a more clear and concise review of the test overall. Any option that is more affordable would be great, because generally, mold testing is very expensive. It is best if you can to do destructive testing in comparison to air samples. Air sampling for mold testing can miss a lot of the more toxic species, because the toxic species, their spores are very heavy. They're not usually found very often in air samples. So you can have air sampling done telling you that there's not any toxic species that are being found, or if they are, they're like very, very minute, not big of a concern. But if you were to do a destructive test of flooring or a wall, that could be more showing you the truth of the situation.
Yeah. And Michaela, sorry, I'm just gonna
Sorry.
just in consideration of time to
Yeah, sorry.
try and keep us on track. There's a few more. I'll tell you the last two questions, and then we'll try and move on. All right, just
Mhm.
so one question and try and
Yep.
how can you send samples to a lab when the mold is behind drywall and invisible?
So what you would have to do in that situation is what's called destructive testing, as you would be forgiven if you find mold. But obviously the problem with that, right, is if you go to test for mold and take a piece out of drywall or whatever, and you find that there's no mold, you will be responsible for the damages. There's another device called a boroscope. It's a camera that's usually used to put down pipes. It has a it's a long kind of neck thing on it. So what you can do with that, it's very small. It creates a very small hole, so you can put it into a wall. You can use this camera to look at different areas of the wall. Usually the mold professionals will have access to these types of boroscopes, but as tenants, you can potentially rent a boroscope from certain places like Rookify or different rental services, at least because then when you're looking, the hole that the boroscope creates is so small that at least you can look on the other side to try to see if you see any mold before diving in there, because sometimes mold can be farther down the wall and you might miss it, and you really don't want to have that happen where you accidentally miss it, right?
Yeah.
But you also don't want to make a bunch of holes potentially trying to find it.
All right. Last one. What if they've been told by a report what's in the apartment and refuse to help? I feel like we're gonna be kind of trying to address this in the next section. Would you agree, Michaela, that maybe better to wait
Yeah,
until the next section?
if that's all right, if we could save that one for the next section, just 'cause, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't want to take too long on time and end up running, 'cause there's a lot of information. Thank you so much, though, for
Yeah.
all these amazing questions and for everyone sharing your experiences. It shows how common this issue is.
All right. Wanna
And
keep
also, thank
going?
you, Rachel. Yeah, thank you, Rachel, for clarifying the long legs are mites, and that technically they're both are mites, but spiders belong with the order of arachnaid. Thank you for that. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so moving on. Thank you everyone for your questions. And if you have any more coming in, continue to add them, and we'll talk the next section. Okay. Okay, so where do you think, oh, oh, am I off the camera? So where do you think mold can't grow? Could it be A, metal, B, concrete, plastic, all the above, or none of the above? If
You
you'd
can
like,
unmute yourself if you want.
yeah, if you like, you can unmute and put your answer in if you feel comfortable.
Or in the chat if you
Yeah.
prefer.
All of the above.
Yep.
We got a D. We got one. Another Donnie says all of the above. Jill's, I don't know if I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, says none of the above. Trevor, all of the above. And
Yeah.
Madeline is saying only metal that I know of, or at least that it can be clean.
Yep.
So yeah, tell us, Michaela. Tell us.
So technically, some of all these answers theoretically right. So generally, mold can't really grow on metal, concrete, or plastic surfaces usually. But if there's an organic food source, such as like a coating of dust on the surface of metal, concrete, or plastic, or paint, these are food sources for mold to grow. So while mold can't really actually create roots and burrow into a deep surface like metal, concrete, or plastic compared to like wood or something, it can still grow. So technically it is D, all the above. Yeah, I just want to share that because it's, yeah. Anyway, so this brings us on to porous versus non-porous materials. These are surfaces that mold can and grow on. So this means, non-porous means anything that's metal, finished wood, plastics, stone, glass. These are also all these surfaces that can be cleaned very easily in comparison to porous materials that have mold growth on them. And it said, the mold, the roots of it can't grow deeply into it because it's non-porous, where porous surfaces such as drywall, carpet, wood, fabric, paper can have roots that grow very deep into the surface. So then that what causes when you go to try to clean it, the roots of the mold are so deeply embedded in the surface of the porous surface, you're not able to clean it properly because the cleaning products can't go deep enough to actually unroot the mold from those surfaces. So that's why, even though if you try to sand a certain object that had mold growth on it, or trying to clean it off with a cleaning substance, it won't truly get rid of all the mold. And if that surface were to get the proper conditions again, having moisture, any roots that are there can regrow over time, which can end up in a battle of trying to fight mold constantly in the same area. Next slide, please. So how do we address this mold and water damage situation? So before you do anything, you want to also assess the situation. So what is the source? In the next section, we'll be going over different sources of mold. But for the context of this, when I say what is the source, you want to know, is the source within your control as a tenant, or is it something that's within your landlord's control? So for example, a source of moisture that's in your control is showering but not using a fan, or cooking without using a fan. Where something that's your landlord's control is, say, a structural issue like leaks from plumbing, roof leaks, foundation or other structural issues, or even caulking around a shower or the grout. These are all things that are within your landlord's control and that they should be taking responsibility and addressing, not you. So if it isn't out of your control, like how big is the area? There's generally, if it's within at least 3 square feet, they say generally that you can address it, but to wear PPE, which we'll be going over. But we'll be going over this in a little bit. So then if it is a very big area, or if it's something within your landlord's control, you want to make sure that you do have mold testing done, and potentially done by yourself, or because like I said, yeah, they can't always give you the results from those mold tests, which can be bad. So next slide, please. So what do you clean mold with? Most people have probably heard about using bleach to kill mold. It's a very common practice that was shared, but there's many problems potentially to that. So I asked George, can using bleach to clean visible mold cause it to become more harmful or resistant to bleach? And can I use vinegar to clean mold? He says, we don't recommend using bleach as a disinfectant. It's too hard on human lungs. Vinegar, hydrogen peroxide, concrobium, and most disinfectants will clean mold from surfaces that they are on, but they have not deeply penetrated. So any surfaces that are like say metal, stone, like the non-porous ones, they're more likely to be able to actually clean it. But if it's something like porous, like drywall, fabric, wood, you're probably not going to be able to clean it. You more likely have to replace it with new building material. Next slide, please. So what do you wear to protect yourself? Most of the time when people sometimes would clean up mold or deal with it, they wouldn't always know to like wear a mask or gloves, or KN95 or anything to the extent that is being shown in the example here. But the reason that, right, is because you're protecting yourself from your main potential exposure areas, like your hands. You're making sure you're not breathing it in. The goggles are helping make sure nothing's going into your eyes. Because when you disturb mold, it is extremely a lot more toxic, because when mold is disturbed, no matter what the species of it is it will release like a lot more spores, because it's the mold's defense mechanism. As if you've ever seen what's it called, like a flower or something, when it's hurt or damaged, it'll release pollen, or not pollen, sorry, like the seeds from it to help spread itself, right, to continue its life, and even if it's been destroyed. So that's why it's very important to make sure you have the proper PPE when addressing mold, because you can actually be at risk for more harm when it's disturbed than when it's not disturbed. Next slide, please. So what not to do? So definitely you want to make sure you're, so improper remediation is like the main problem what a lot of landlords have done. As seen in the photo on the right hand side, this is how the HVAC company that our landlord, thankfully he did try to address it, but he didn't believe that it was mold. So this company, when they came to address it, they started trying to use a broom to sweep out all the mold spores without containing the area at all. Because usually you want to make sure the area is contained, because if it's not, you'll have mold spores going all over the house, basically. Also, any mycotoxins from species of molds that are there will also be sent with those spores. What's it called? So again, since this person didn't have proper maybe training exactly about mold, or didn't have really bad symptoms from mold, didn't know how serious working with mold is more of a biohazard than just a common nuisance for some people. Specifically, you should always be working as if someone potentially could be at risk for serious complications, because everyone reacts differently. You might not know until it's too late. So yeah, no containment of area. You want to make sure you're not using bleach. That's what also this HVAC technician used. He requested to use one of our Clorox bleach wipes. And using bleach on mold, again, sends it into its defense mechanism defense mechanism mode, where it's producing even more mycotoxins from the growth that was there, because the bleach is harming it. You want to make sure also you're not mixing certain cleaning products. You don't want to ever mix vinegar and hydrogen peroxide or bleach and vinegar, because it can create very toxic fumes. And also you want to make sure, like, what not to do is not replacing water damaged building material or other moldy building material. Because again, even if you fix the water leak, even if you address the source of the moisture, but you're not getting rid of any affected building material, you're not doing it properly, and it can still cause harm to people living there. Next slide, please. Okay, and then we're gonna take a chance now to answer some more questions.
Oh, do you want to do questions again, or do you want to wait till the next sections?
Okay, we can. Okay, let's do that. Okay, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
So what is within your control as a tenant? So within your control as a tenant, some sources can be not using exhaust fans or opening windows when showering or cooking. You could also, if you have spoiled food in your fridge, that can be a source of mold, but usually not as concerning compared to other larger areas, because it's usually more contained in what's it called? Little areas, right? Also, if you're not cleaning surfaces regularly, I know I personally struggle with that sometimes. It's like making sure you're always dusting, you're wiping down your surfaces. Specifically, like even like little nooks and crannies that you might not notice and stuff, is because the dust can act as a food source for mold there. So even if you have high humidity in your house, because it's summer, it's hot, and you have a lot of dust, that can create enough of an environment for mold to be able to grow. Also, you want to make sure you're not drying your clothes indoors. This is one that that wasn't always, so I learned a lot when I started learning about mold. So also, yeah, I want to make sure you're not drying your clothes indoors, because when you dry your clothes indoors, it releases a lot of moisture, and this increase in moisture can be enough to fuel mold growth in the area. Especially because sometimes when we have our laundry, right, it's usually in the basement, and basements already are places of high humidity. So if you are drying your clothes down there, you're adding moisture to all over your humid-ish area, or area that has condensation, so it can really not be good. And if it causes mold, that's within your control technically. And if the landlord finds you responsible, then you're kind of, and you're supposed to be responsible for that. So that's fair. Also, you want to make sure you're not blocking any air vents, because you want to make sure you're having proper airflow in your house, whether that be with like opening windows, or if you have air like vents on your floor, you want to make sure you don't have furniture on top of it, because that'll obstruct the airflow and can create more of a better environment for mold to grow. And now we're going to move on to what isn't within the tenant's control. So things that aren't within the tenant's control, right, are foundation cracks, windows that are starting to have condensation or leaks on them, right? Blocked rain gutters can also lead to water infiltration, which can cause mold. Flooding issues, roof leaks, plumbing leaks, or improper construction. That was part of the reason not only that our previous house have a mold problem is because the roofers who had done the roofing at our previous house had cut corners when they were doing the roofing, which led to what's called water infiltrating the attic and in between the row of townhouses that we lived. So due to this improper construction, it led to this mold growth that went on for a very, very long time that no one was aware of really, because it didn't show obvious symptoms until there was black mold growing out of the walls and the ceilings. And even though that had happened 6 years ago, they hadn't been able to properly address it because it was a very long lawsuit for our previous landlord and that roofer and the condominium to try to get some arrears for it, right? It's quite expensive to deal with mold. Another thing that landlords are responsible of is shower and grout caulking. It's shower/grout caulking. So as you can see in the bottom photo here, very usually what's it called? Caulking can get mold growth from it because we have, when you're using soaps and stuff, the residue from soap becomes a food source for mold. And naturally, since our showers or baths create a lot of moisture, it's a perfect environment if it's not being cleaned frequently. But just naturally over time, wear and tear, shower grout, caulking/grout will need to be replaced by your landlord. And if they don't, that can wear away the sealant that is there. And when that happens, mold can infiltrate deep into the caulking or grout. And if that isn't addressed over time, that can actually lead to moisture getting behind the sub wall behind the shower, which can create actually a whole bunch of mold behind the shower area out of view. So it's very important that landlords properly address these things instead of cutting corners. Another thing again is like lack of appliance maintenance, which is seen in our photo on the right hand here, that our landlord hadn't properly fixed our AC unit or hadn't kept up with the yearly cleaning as it's recommended to prevent mold. A lot of the sources of mold can be prevented with general maintenance. A lot of the time, these general maintenance costs will cost say $300, $400, $500. Landlords don't think it's so necessary, and situations like that happen. Next slide, please. So again, how to prevent mold then, right? So if we want to prevent mold, you got to control the humidity or moisture. If you can control the humidity or moisture, you can control like what the mold needs, right, to grow or to keep active. So that can be done by, opening windows, increasing the airflow of the area, especially when you're cooking or showering, because these are things that create a lot of humidity and moisture in the air. Another way to prevent mold, right, is addressing water damage quickly. Again, this isn't usually on the tenant's fault to address water damage quickly. If you notice something, right, and you tell your landlord right away, you're doing your job, but it doesn't mean the landlord's always going to respond right away. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But if they do, that's how you can prevent mold. And also using a dehumidifier can really help. So because the dehumidifier takes away the humidity, can help a lot with that extra moisture in the air, especially because we live in such a humid city. Next question. Sorry, next one. So what are your rights as tenants? So as tenants, if something in your unit or building does need repair, make sure your landlord knows about it. You want to tell them right away, because if you delay sometimes on telling them, they can try to turn it that you are obviously responsible because you did not tell them right away. So usually in the RTA, it stipulates that you must tell them right away. And that is very important, especially to prevent mold. You definitely want to tell them right away, even if you're worried about any repercussions. Next, you want to also, it is best always communicate with your landlord in writing, including text or email. So there's a paper trail. Having a paper trail is extremely, extremely important, especially if you go to the LTB, because, you have all the documented times, dates of your communication, how long it took between what generally was said, right? It's very important. It can also be very helpful to take photos of the problem and put the date on the photos. That's something we learned was really important too when we sued our landlord. We had to take a lot of photos. But some of the photos, if you're taking photos, make sure you get photos from far away of the mold growth or area, and then also photos close up, because since we didn't have photos from farther away, we only majorly had photos close up of certain areas. It wasn't able to completely hold up in court, which was horrible. So you can avoid that by taking lots of photos and keeping it documented. Also, housing is considered, essential service even during during the pandemic, and landlords are supposed to be doing all regular maintenance and keep up at this time. So the excuse that we're in lockdown or something isn't acceptable, right? This is an essential service that needs to be addressed. And if your landlord hasn't fixed a problem, do call the city of bylaw, and you can reach them at 311, and you can ask for property standards. Property inspector to do an inspection of your unit or the building, wherever the problem is. Next slide, please. Oh, 1 sec, my screen's loading it. Ooh, I want this to load. There we go. So continuing on, if bylaw does believes the landlord is to be in a violation, that they're not addressing the problem, that they're responsible, right? They can issue an order to force a landlord to do the repair, because under the bylaw regulations, mold is not acceptable on any what's called building material. And if there is a leak or signs of a leak that aren't being addressed, they will also be ordered to address that. You also want to make sure you're taking down the bylaw officer's name and reference number, so you have them as a contact. And depending on the problem, you might also want to contact your local public health department or fire marshal office. Sometimes they can also help enforce orders. It's just better, if you are going to be going to court with them, to have more public health officials and bylaw, having more people accountable and witnessing what's happened. If your landlord bylaw still does not fix the problem, you can then apply to the landlord tenant board. And when you apply to the board, they will schedule a hearing where you and your landlord can each explain the problem to a member of the board. Before the hearing, you and your landlord can try to settle your problems yourselves or with the help of a board employee. And at this hearing, it is up to you to convince the board member about the problem. It's very important, again, to bring evidence to your hearing. It's having witnesses, photos, audio, video, inspector reports, work orders, letter, notes, or anything else you can help to prove your case to the board member. It's very important also to be able to have signs to show that you are trying to help with the moisture problem, whether that be proof that you were running fans constantly, or that that you prove it that you were doing your part and under your responsibilities as a tenant to make sure that that the sources of moisture within your control, you were controlling, basically. In my case, when landlord tenant board, we showed that we had multiple fans going in our house because we couldn't use the AC system anymore, and that we had proof that we had been maintaining our duties as tenants. That's very important to show, because the landlord, if you take them to court, they can easily start obviously trying to say that it's your fault for the mold, and that you encourage the growth, which can be in certain situations, right? So that's why it's very good to have evidence to show that you are doing your part. So then also, if you are successful, you could win some money back on your rent. Usually they will order a rent abatement. This for any rent you pay. Never not pay rent because of a maintenance issue. That is still illegal, very legal. So it's always, even if there's a maintenance issue that they're not addressing, keep paying your rent, because at least if you do go to the LTB and they find your landlord is responsible, right, they can order your landlord to pay you back that rent or take it off your future rent and order them to do the repairs. Thank you, Emily. Next one. So why isn't mold taken seriously? So because if we recognize that mold is generally a health hazard, yeah, why isn't it taken seriously? Well, because not everyone will develop symptoms to it. Some people will go into a certain place, right, or they've lived there and they would say, oh, well, previous tenants haven't had any symptoms. It must just be you who is sick for other reasons, right? That's false, because everyone has different sensitivities. Everyone can react to mold differently. So the idea that just because someone else doesn't have any reactions does not mean that that it shouldn't be taken seriously, or that there isn't potentially a mold problem if there's signs of water damage or mold potentially. So also because it's mold remediation is extremely expensive. This is why a lot of landlords will find the cheapest way to address a problem, whether that be with painting or hiding mold, because it's a lot cheaper to hide it or paint over it than it is to properly hire remediation teams. And the reason for that is because mold is a biohazard. So when you're addressing mold, you generally, like, depending on the species, after you do the testing, and we know the testing is expensive, right? Since that adds to the cost, having people trained to do mold remediation is it's expensive in comparison, again, to hiring just any contractor who can just rip out the drywall or the water damaged building material, but they might not be using any what's it called, containment areas. So that is going to be jeopardizing the health of the tenants once again. And because the law does not stipulate how landlords or property management has to remediate a problem, there's a lot of room for them to do so. Specifically, the law says, that there shall not be any mold or signs of water damage on the walls or ceiling. And if there has been mold, that there will be a protective layer of something, a coating, after the mold is dealt with. But what if a landlord just were to like spray some bleach, right, and then puts a anti or a fungus kind of paint over it? It's very easy to hide mold, and that's part of the reason why it's not usually dealt with very seriously, or if it's hidden. Also, it's not usually covered by insurance. Water damage generally will be covered by insurance, but if water damage goes unchecked, and that's the landlord's fault, sometimes it will be, right? That will most insurance companies will not cover the mold damage. They'll cover water damage, not mold. And even if you do ask for your water damage insurance claim, that will drive their premiums up a lot. And because mold and water damage is so expensive, again, that would create a lot of a cost. So it's a lot cheaper, again, to find the easy way out, even if it comes at the cost of a tenant. Also, if you do turn to the insurance as an owner, your building value will decrease, because the history of water damage, or especially mold, will decrease the value of the building when it comes time to selling. So that's why it's very common that a lot of people or contractors will take a DIY approach, and that makes it so there's no history of past water damage or mold in that place, that unless it's still evident or found later. As I said, again, coming back to it, it's a lot cheaper to hide it than remove it. Next slide, please. So tenant question said, if the water damage happened a while ago. Oh, sorry, I realized I just had this question earlier. So again, destructive testing is a really good way of testing, because if you might not know if there's past water damage, and so destructive testing is the best method to accurately tell if there has been, besides air sampling. Yes. Next slide, please. And so yeah, now is finally the time. Thank you everyone for being a part of this. We will now move into questions that you've asked, and if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh.
I have a few,
awesome.
one that I've been trying to keep up with the chat a little bit, so bear with me, guys, if I don't get it. One is question is what if the landlord refuses to access their insurance? I don't directly know the answer. I don't know if Michaela, if that's something that you're
at least as far as the RTA goes, there's nothing really that stipulates that they must access their insurance. Giles might know a little bit more about this. Giles is part of the Ontario tenant rights group on Facebook, which is very beneficial if anyone has any questions relating to their rights or how their landlord's going about business. Giles is very experienced, but I don't believe there's anything that exactly stipulates that they must go to their insurance, which is why they can easily contact a contractor that's a lot cheaper to like fix the pipe leak, but not remove the water damage material, like the drywall, because that would cost a lot more money. So we'll just, yeah.
Yeah. There's been yeah, Giles has a comment.
Okay. Yes, see, thank you, Giles. I'm just gonna look here.
Yeah, he's saying if your landlord is complaining that they don't want to trigger their insurance, that it's a distraction. As a
Mhm.
tenant, you don't care how they pay for the repair. You
Mhm.
just hired them to do the repair.
Yeah.
Uh, and then Danny was just chiming in that the landlord is just stalling you. They either have insurance and they don't want to use it, or they don't have insurance and don't want to repair their problem by law.
Yeah, that both of the answers exactly hit the situation pretty much right on the head. That it's basically a way of landlords getting out of having to access insurance. Because at least if they did access insurance, they would have more of like the funds to have it properly remediated to the full extent it needs to be, not just the way that could cut corners. But even if they do access insurance, like it doesn't tell them how they have to deal with it, right? There's no exact law saying that you have to remove building material. Like that could just be like a recommendation from the person who's doing the repairs, but there's no law saying that they have to have that building material placed after.
Yeah. Then Rochelle's been asking quite a few questions about her context as well. You know, just to summarize, like the property manager for everyone, but that her property manager, she's been having this issue with you know, moisture problems since like 2015. It's also causing like problems with electricity, like with the breakers.
Jesus.
So there was a fire, you know, and now the property manager just told her to keep an eye on more water. Um, um, but there was a fire back in 2015. So she was asking what she can do. And I was, you know, having a bit of a conversation with Rochelle, you know, that's something that, you know, whether, you know, one, going to the LTB, as well as, you know, keeping a paper trail, which a few people in the chat have said, you know, making sure that you're taking photos, that you're like you were saying, doing your part, but also you know, the next section we're going to be talking a little bit more about ACORN. So if anyone has, you know, big personal issues that they want, you know, ACORN to follow up with, to see how we can support um, pushing forward to fight back against that. So we'll be talking a bit more next. I don't know if you want to add anything in on that, Michaela. Oh, I think we lost Michaela for a second. Sorry, she's just coming back. There you go. Hey, Michaela.
Oh, sorry, I just got booted out of the meeting there.
There you go. Oh, we're good. We got you back. I was just saying, there's some stuff talking again about some more personal issues, and I was just talking a little bit about how we're going to be following up with everyone that's in the meeting tomorrow to see if we can see how ACORN can support on those issues. But maybe we should just move on to the next section and then see if we can address maybe some of the more personal issues at the end. All right.
Okay. See, thank you. Thank you for everyone who's been sharing their stories and their experiences about these situations. Again. Okay. So So for the final part of our workshop tonight, we'll be going into organizing collective action, because this is a very common problem, as we've realized, right? That should not be acceptable, and it's disgusting that being treated this way, in so many different ways, right? That's not only impacting your health and your security. This needs to be addressed. So what can we do? It's like also originally, why are we bringing awareness to this, right? Because the mold can be so elusive and easy to hide and not always visible. This can lead to this comment being very common, right? As many of you experience, where your landlord or property management is pushing off dealing with this problem or downplaying the seriousness of the issue. So I want to bring awareness to this, that we can all come together and change this. So also because the laws aren't just, as we've talked about, right? There's no exact procedure that landlords are enforced to follow when it comes to dealing with water damage or mold. They're just told, make sure it's not on the walls, and make sure that the leak is addressed, but not about, exactly actually just properly remedying it. Because we're generally right, this issue can be prevented if mold water damage is addressed when it happens, or at least in a fast fashion, or if maintenance things are kept up with, mold can be prevented. And it's also usually disproportionately impacts, lower income communities like involving with us, because a lot of the time these houses that we're living in that are more affordable, right, might have not been maintained for long periods of time, or the owners of it aren't maintaining it as they should, which leaves a more likely chance that you're going to have mold or other pest issues and maintenance issues, and it's just not acceptable. Again, the final part of this, right? Affordable housing should not cost your health. That speaks for itself. So we need to fight to change this, because it's messed up that anyone has to go through this. Next slide, please. So recently, ACORN has been working on the Healthy Home Campaign initiative. So this is what they have won recently. So historically in Ottawa, the state of Tenants House has been a #1 issue of ACORN members that want to see change. It's not, this has been a long-standing issue, these maintenance issues of different pests, right, or asbestos, or like mold. So ACORN has been working on the Healthy Homes campaign. So in the past, they've won in 2013 $200,000 worth of rent abatements for tenants in Haringey. The money was the money tenants got back for living in substandard housing. That's in a situation, right, where the property management company, instead of actually addressing the many maintenance issues that needed to be addressed, they were just letting the maintenance issue go, and it kept getting worse and worse to the point, obviously, it's severely impacting the health and safety of the Haringey community. And so thankfully, ACORN was in there helping them fight for their rights there. And also in 2015, the municipal bylaw to make appliances the responsibility of landlords. Before, if you had fridge or stove broke, you'd be responsible for replacing it, and that's pretty crazy. I mean, you know how expensive like fridges and stoves and other appliances are. It's crazy that a tenant would be expected to pay that. That's amazing that ACORN had fought and made it so landlords became responsible. Especially also, like, in my case, we took our landlord to court because the mold that was in the AC unit. The only reason he was fully actually responsible for that is because of this what's called change that ACORN made possible. And then also hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs to apartment buildings across the city, which has been long-standing and much needed. And ACORN has been fighting to help make that possible, and it's great that they have. Next slide. Especially so during COVID-19, we have been pushing bylaw to announce clear guidelines for essential and urgent repairs, which is really important, right? Because I remember also, like, first when we had our mold issue at our house back at the start of the pandemic around it. So like in May or so, the bylaw told us, they're not doing, or sorry, the house inspector explained that they're not going to be doing in-person inspections because of the pandemic, which kind of a little ridiculous when they have all these other essential workers who are out there, risking their health. But the home inspector wasn't doing anything at that time. Now it's different, thankfully. But again, pushing what is needing to be done. So also we have the ACORN's done many phone blitzes, actions to landlords and bylaw, and has won members meetings with city council officials and decision makers over the past 6 months, which is great because it's really getting it driven home of what's going on and connecting to the people who are really influencing the policy and regulations, right? Below, there's also a video from CTV Ottawa News article on Maria Mendoza's fight against Timber Creek, who wouldn't help clean her asbestos-contaminated apartment. This clip was the result of the Ottawa ACORN phone action, and so you can click the link below. It's crazy that people are being forced to live in these environments.
I can actually share the video if we can actually watch it. Can everyone see my screen? Can everyone see this, the video?
I see it. Right in the chat, Kim.
Yes, okay, we're good. All right, let me know if you guys can hear it properly.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Can
Well,
everyone
single
hear
mom
that?
living with an asthmatic 11-year-old son in an apartment contaminated with asbestos is getting help from her landlord.
She's been trying to have the repairs done and the asbestos cleaned up, which, as Peter Sperling tells us, she's finding very difficult during a pandemic, even though the problems started much earlier.
My son is taking his allergy medicine every single day, and it's something that never happened, especially when we are at home. Like, it's not allergy season yet.
Maria Mendoza lives with her son in this Herongate apartment building.
My son is 11 years old. He's asthmatic. If he doesn't take his medicine, he starts to be very bad with his asthma. So I know it's something here.
And that's something, she says, started 3 months ago in January.
One of the maintaining guys, he came and to check my apartment because he said that it was leaking in the apartment dumpster. So he came and we found a big puddle in the living room. So he make a hole with a knife.
To open up the wall.
Water start to coming to my living room like a fountain.
Covering the carpet, couch, living room.
He called the plumber and he tried to contain the water.
And once the water stopped,
my biggest concern, because I smell it was right away was my son is asthmatic. So they told me if I wasn't feeling safe, it was okay to call my insurance company. They explained me that they have to remove the wall and remove the carpet.
she spent a week in a hotel starting in late January, but when she returned, nothing was fixed. So she reached out to her landlord, then her insurance.
The insurance guy, he came. He noticed something and he was worried about the asbestos. So I wasn't worried about that. Even I didn't know something.
She had the apartment tested for asbestos, and it was found in the carpet and on the couch.
He told me that it was unsafe to stay here.
CTV News reached out to Timber Creek, Mendoza's landlord. In a statement received last Friday, they wrote, "We have been in regular contact with the resident. We can confirm we are in the process of the final stage of cleaning, which includes carpet removal and providing alternative accommodations while the cleaning takes place. At no point was there a health hazard within the suite in question." Today, Timber Creek tells CTV the cleaning and carpet replacement will occur this week, and they will be putting up Maria and her son up in a hotel room from Tuesday until Friday. Mendoza is a member of ACORN, an organization of low to moderate income families. She asked them for help.
We're all forced to stay at home right now. So having a health issue in your unit that could possibly make you more vulnerable to COVID is a really scary possibility for some of these low-income people.
But I have been living here for almost 12 years, 11 years. And this is I'm not this kind of person to just call for no reason. This is for me, it was a major thing.
Peter Sperling, CTV News.
Yeah.
Wow. So happy that she was able to be in contact with ACORN, thankfully. That was so disgusting that Timber Creek was saying there's never a health concern or anything like, you know, in that unit. Like clearly there was. Like they're trying to dismiss this so they're not legally responsible when they are. And did they follow certain procedures? Did they use proper like HEPA filtration after? Like they said they cleaned it, but I hope that there is some protocols that they're enforced to follow in that situation, especially because it's asbestos.
We have like one more. Yeah, this is the next slide, and then there's one more video if everyone's a very new one that we just had made. But you want to tell us a bit more about the pest control bylaw and the rental management bylaw?
Yep, sure. Okay, so last November in 2020, ACORN members won the development of 2 new bylaws, so the pest control bylaw and the rental management bylaw. Because of the pressure, the city has also hired more property standards inspectors, increased targeted protective enforcement of property standards, and is exploring the creation of an online database of property standard violations. That way, if you're looking at signing a lease in a new place, you can see beforehand if it's up to code or if it has had previous infractions. That'd be a great resource for everyone. Even currently, we're still organizing actions to protect our members living in unhealthy homes. It's great.
Yeah. So I'll just share this video if everyone can see. Can everyone see that? All good? Yeah?
We find rats in here.
Everybody deserves a safe, comfortable, affordable place to live. That's what ACORN believes. Our members believe that. So we really want to make sure that everybody has that.
When I was going through that, I was hospitalized for 4 days, isolated because of the bed bugs. I had all kinds of tests to try to find out why I was losing blood. And they finally concluded that everything else was eliminated and it was the bed bugs causing the problem. And I was getting so seriously out of breath when I would do anything that the nurses warned me. I had to keep going back for blood transfusions and iron infusions, and the nurses warned me not to exert myself at all or I would have heart failure. And this was a situation for a month or two until 7 treatments I had to go through to get the bugs down to a reasonable number so I started to recover. But they never completely finished the job at that point either. So there's lots of problems with them.
They have a rat problem. And we found out about it because our organizers, they go door to door several hours a day, most of the week, and they knock on doors and they ask people, do they have problems? And that issue came out loud and clear. There is a rat problem.
ACORN is here, continuing its campaign for healthy homes in Ottawa. That is what we want to do, is improve the conditions for renters in Ottawa.
This is Blaine. He is a fellow ACORN member, and he's also here to door knock today.
I joined ACORN because at the time my landlord was not keeping the ramp clear because I'm in a wheelchair, and the elevators were working infrequently, and I was stuck in my apartment for days on end. So they came along, knocking on the doors, and they provided me with solutions to my problems.
Who are we? What do we want? When do we want it? Now.
Hello?
Huh?
Gone quiet.
Yeah, we'll be able to talk in a second. It was a great video from Acorn showing all their work. They've been working with tenants to help make sure landlords don't get away with heinous living conditions they've been forcing their tenants to go through. I really wish I had known about Acorn before when we were going through the mold situation at our previous house when I was really sick. So I hadn't heard about Acorn back then, but if I had, I would have definitely contacted them, and that would have been really amazing. It's great to know that we have an organization like this that's helping all of us tenants come together and be able to fight for our rights.
Yeah. But thanks everyone for sticking with us. That was kind of the end of the presentation. I don't know, Michaela, if we want to try and look at some of the stuff that was happening in the chat, and if anyone maybe wants to unmute themselves and maybe like share something, now, or have any questions for Michaela or for Acorn.
Let's like go through the chat here.
Also, I think I was saying to Rochelle and other individuals that were sharing some of their personal stories. We're gonna be we have the sign-in list, so we're gonna be contacting everyone tomorrow to see. Yeah, Jennifer would like to get more involved in ACORN. Is it only local to Ottawa? No, ACORN is actually national. We're nationwide. So I can give you a call tomorrow, and we can talk a bit more about how to get you involved in your local area. We're pretty urban centered, but in the past year, especially in COVID, we've been expanding into the rural areas in the north as well. Peel area, like we've been really trying to get out there and make things happen. So I will definitely be giving you guys a call to talk more specifically. But if anyone has any more questions for Michaela or me,
if you'd like to share your experiences too, and thank you for everyone who has shared your experiences so far and different conditions you've been forced to live in. I'm happy that this has been an opportunity for you to share your experiences and also get some feedback from other people in the community, and to be able to be a part of ACORN together. We're all in this together. As cheesy as that might sound now at this point in the pandemic, but it's true, especially what we're all being forced to live through in different variations.
Yeah, and just seeing one question that maybe I can help out with. Rochelle was asking about if we're getting any closer to landlord licensing, and that's always like a complex answer. The answer is yes, because ACORN, we're growing every day, and we're really, and our Healthy Homes campaign is still active. We're still organizing on this issue, but the nuance of that is like with anything in social justice, as all of you who've had direct experiences with this will know, your wins are sometimes smaller than your losses. This is an issue that we have to fight for, because our rights our rights are not just going to be given to us. In some contexts, the law is not always just. It is not always in our functioning in our best interest, and for that we need to organize together, because sometimes things won't get addressed unless we make noise about it. Like I think Michaela was saying earlier, the squeaky wheel gets oiled, and I think that's true. So sometimes we got to make some noise about something. And in ACORN's experience, a lot of things where is there is like the legal LTB route, but Madeline was bringing up that that's kind of something that can be very intimidating. It can be a very hard thing, and sometimes it won't give you the results you're looking for. And we actually had a lawyer from Community Legal Services who did a special tenant rights info session similar to this, and he was answering legal questions and got to a point where, sometimes the law's not on your side. And that's where ACORN steps in, right? Because, if you're on your own dealing with this against your landlord, probably you're not going to have the same results as you want. So, that's why we're here to make us make a difference together. We're a membership union. The members are the ones that are the backbone of this organization. So that's what allows us to, really represent our members' interests and work on behalf of that. So that's trying to answer that. Let's see if there's anything else here.
And again, right, it's so difficult to try to take your landlord to LDB when you're already suffering the health consequences of the living environment. Especially it's Madeline's experience too. The impacts of how it hurts your health and stuff. And so have I, and so have many other people who are a part of our meeting here today. Personally, with my experience, I didn't realize that the mold was causing so many of my symptoms until we had spent time outside of our unit, and I realized my symptoms went away. But when we returned, all my symptoms came back, and after multiple testing that didn't show that I had an underlying disease or other condition, that's when we realized how much the mold was impacting my health, and I'm still dealing with those repercussions from living in that place.
And Michaela, one question that came from before that I want to, I have two questions now, but that I want to ask you. One from Mavis. She was asking, if you suspect there's water damage, can the owner of the building refuse to let experts enter? Do you know?
Specifically, you can have for what happened with our situation, at least when I thankfully used all my savings I had available to hire our own mold inspector. I didn't know about Mr. George White at the time. We hired a different inspector, but we were able to have that inspector come in because our landlord didn't really know about it. But I don't know how much if they're ordered by someone, if they can say, no, we don't want you coming in type thing. I'm not 100% sure on that. So I'd have to get back to you on that one exactly.
And Jennifer Larson was asking a question for you, Michaela, about how did you improve your symptoms?
Oh, so how to prove it? So that was quite difficult at first, and our landlord knew that. He kind of mocked me, honestly, when I told him that I believe my symptoms were coming from the mold. I wanted to take him to the LTB to sue him, and just basically saying, you're not good luck trying to find the connectors that are going to prove that that your mold sickness is from the mold, because there isn't a lot of standardized testing exactly out there unless you have a mold infection. Specifically, what I did have access to at the time though was what's it called? I saw a naturopath at the time, and thankfully, because I was in school, I had insurance that covered the testing, but it showed it did a mold panel, which were to see if I had a mold allergy and to see if I had my immune system had been responding to mold recently. And when we did that, there's proof that my immune system had a very large reaction to specifically 3 common molds that are really usually found in water damaged buildings. And some of the molds that were found on the test, the air test that we had done, as well as we did a swab test of the AC unit. Along with that, I was able to see a respirologist, but I wasn't able to see them until we had moved out of that building, because our landlord wasn't addressing the situation, and he was having in-person showings during the pandemic and while I was still sick. So we decided to try to get out of there at least, because it was not going to get better. But when I saw the respirologist, she explained that my symptoms sounded very much like what's called hypersensitivity pneumonis, which is what causes a lot of lung inflammation, right? Cause flu-like symptoms after being exposed to an irritant such as mold. So knowing that, she believed I had acute hypersensitivity pneumonis, but we were able to use that in the court case, unfortunately, because when I had seen her, it was 2 months after I had moved out of the mold building, right? And my symptoms had basically gone away unless I was into another water damaged building, it seemed, because my symptoms would come back. but only if I went into a place that had potentially mold. But so because I was gone out of there for 2 months, they weren't able to then therefore say that I had hypersensitivity pneumonitis caused by our previous rental because of the 2 month difference between there. But then I also saw an allergist, actually just more recently in January, who I explained my symptoms to and how I got extremely sick after living in this rental, and I developed multiple food and chemical sensitivities that I never had before, along with all the other symptoms that developed while living there. And he explained it's most likely what's called sick building syndrome. So what that can be caused is from a multitude of different indoor pollutants as well as potentially outdoor pollutants. But it's very common, especially in water damaged buildings, because of the myotoxins that mold releases. There's no standardized testing for sick building syndrome. It's more of a diagnosis they come to once they've ruled out everything else. So once you've had ultrasounds done, you've had x-rays, you've had blood tests, you've had a lot of different testing to rule out any other conditions. And then that would have been really great for our court case, but then our landlord actually died in February of a heart attack suddenly. So we were never actually able to get the justice from our situation in court and stuff. And this is part of the reason also why I want to make sure that I can help fight with other tenants to make sure that they can get the justice that they deserve and are not getting because their landlords are cutting corners. And yeah. So thanks for listening to my long explanation there.
Yes. Does anyone have any other questions that they feel like haven't been addressed yet? Anything else that they'd like to share before we wrap up tonight? And remember, we'll be in contact with you guys, and I'd love to invite everyone to the next chapter meeting. I'll be calling, and so that we can start trying to organize an action on this issue. And I also wanted to thank Michaela for all of the really hard work she's put into. Michaela made this presentation. This is something that was really important to her. ACORN, we played a supporting role in trying to make this happen, but this is Michaela's baby, and she's done an amazing job. First time doing a presentation like this in front of so many people. So I just want to make a really great shout out, for doing an absolutely amazing job. We have
my questions coming in.
Yeah, Rochelle, what was this property management bylaw that was won? So the property management bylaw, which was I think you asked earlier also if it was local or not. And yes, as a bylaw, it is at the municipal level. ACORN is fighting this in multiple fronts, in different in different cities. But the base, in some ways, sorry if I'm getting this wrong, but to my understanding, the property management in some ways was like a different wording of landlord licensing. To make the system that allows landlords. Sorry, now I need the writing because I don't know too well. The rental management was to get more property standards inspectors and increased targeted enforcement on property standards, and the creation of the online database, which if everyone's interested, we can try and share that to everyone's emails. And there was some other questions that I can't see now. What if you have both a roof leak damage and leaking pipes damage? I think it just means more reason to make sure that you're taking photos, and as Michaela would probably want to add that it's to make sure that you're doing your part and recording and making sure that you have proof that you're doing everything within your responsibility. so that you know you can pursue justice on the landlord's part. What do you think, Michaela, in your mushroom hat? In your oh, frozen. Okay. And last, publicly ask the councilors to live in moldy buildings for a month. I love it. It's like the bus the bus challenge, but we'll have the mold challenge. All right.
Yeah, exactly. Also, as Stephen and Danny mentioned, right? Some people are afraid to say anything or fear of being evicted, right? Or just fear of complaining because your landlord or property manager has so much control over such as your basic security of your shelter, right? And then the times where the affordable housing crisis is so bad, a lot of people are afraid to talk up and worried that it could have repercussions that could end up, landlord somehow doesn't re-rent to you or just makes your life a living hell, and that should not be okay. And you shouldn't have to be pushed into a corner and intimidated and bullied by them. It's horrible.
Yeah. All right, everyone. I think we'll shut up shop now. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks for inviting us.
Oh, thanks Richard for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
everyone.
you very much, Michaela. It was very informative. Thank you, Emily.
Bye, everybody.
I learned a lot.
Bye everyone. Cheers.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
much.
Stephen. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks,
Thank you.
Madeline, for your
Everyone.
great comments.
Learned so much. Thank you, everyone. I'll be sending